I think I will start with section 4. Yes. On the establishment of the ARAL program, um, in terms of the length of time that this will be implemented, my understanding is this will go on for as long as it's needed, because all over the world, there are tutorial sessions that are available. So my understanding is, as needed, we will budget to ensure that we can continue these programs. And I just want to emphasize, Your Honor, that this will cost us, because although the bill does identify that the teachers who have already complied with their minimum 6 hours, they will be the ones who will handle this. The fact is, there will be additional compensation. The bill also identifies where the compensation will come from. But if we want this to be effective, I'm putting this on record because in about 8 months, we will start tackling the budget, and I want to be sure that this gets the support it needs. So do we agree, Mr. Sponsor, that there will be additional costs? We need to upskill the teachers for the intervention that we want them to be able to implement properly.
Yes. Well, Mr. President, thank you very much to the gentle lady from Taguig. Definitely, Mr. President, there'll be additional cost. Hopefully, with the assessments, we can have a much more targeted program, meaning we will determine per school level who are the students who are in dire need of an intervention, and the intervention will also depend on the level of the level of assessment, or the level of what's the right word? Proficiency. The level of proficiency the student will be in, Mr. President. So the first step will be an assessment,
Yes.
and the assessment will determine who will be part of the program.
Is this a national assessment, if I may just
This
interject?
is a national assessment,
Okay.
Mr. President. But it will be done obviously on a per school level.
Yes.
But the assessment will be conducted nationally, so that DepEd will have a full view on how many students will be part of the program. But it's also important to note, Mr. President, that it will not be a one-size-fits-all.
That's
It's
for sure.
important that the student, the level of proficiency per student will be determined, no? And that's where the intervention will come in.
I understand that, and I recognize that the test, the proficiency test must be in place first. But do we have a ballpark figure? Like, if we assume 10% of the population need intervention, 20% of the population, and I'll go now to my next question so His Honor can just answer together. Section 7 refers to who will implement this, and it says teachers and para-teachers shall be responsible for tutoring learners. Is this compulsory on their part, or can they opt out? Because we did not go into those kind of details in the bill.
Well, Mr. President, during the period of interpellation, I mentioned that the high estimate, this is on the high side, will be about 7 billion pesos, Mr.
Okay.
President.
Okay.
And the reason for that is we took the learning poverty numbers of the World Bank as the number, Mr. President. And we also came out with a benchmark cost, no, using the different models, for example, being implemented in other countries. And the
Okay.
most efficient that we came out with is from Ghana, no, which is how much per learner? 550 pesos per learner. No? So
Only
that is
for a year?
for a year, Mr. President. And that's the most efficient and recommended by World
Effective
Bank.
ba?
Effective naman, Mr. President, because it's a
Mali
model
kasi
that the
nun eh. Parang budget lang yata ng mga tao yan sa cellphone nila.
Yes, Mr.
Can
President.
you imagine if every parent would set that aside, then the government will not have to spend.
Yes, Mr. President. And that's why we have to emphasize that it will be a learner-centered approach. You know? So what's good for the learner, what the learner needs, we should come up with a program on what the learner requires, instead of a one-size big program for everyone to follow.
Permission of the two gentlemen,
Yes.
gentleman and lady.
We can't hear you that well, Mr. President.
I know they always keep shutting
there.
my mic off.
There,
I don't
there,
know why they keep shutting my mic off. When I want to interject, I cannot interject. I'm the Senate President. Can you imagine that?
Bakit naman ganun?
Please take note doon sa loob. Kayo, kanina pa ako gumaganyan sa inyong dalawa dyan. Okay? So,
Baka
anyway.
kasi naririnig, Mr. President, pag may lumalapit sa'yo, baka
Kaya
yung
ginaganyan
iba-
ko. Ginaganyan ko naman siya.
Okay,
But anyway.
Please proceed.
Thank you. I heard, did I hear right? You said the Senate to the sponsor, the gentleman said that this was a program in Ghana.
Ghana, he did.
Yes,
Is that the
actually,
country Ghana?
in Africa, Mr. President.
Correct, Africa.
Yeah.
But aren't we like in together with Ghana in the last place in our, I think the world
The PISA.
rankings?
The PISA, well, actually, Mr.
So
President, we're at the
That's why-
last, we're at the very last.
So we're going to pattern ourselves with the ones that are with us in Ghana?
No, Mr. President, we looked at different models, and because Ghana obviously is a developing nation, and it's also a poor nation. So according to World Bank, they came up with an intervention program, and the cost of that intervention program per student is about 550 pesos, Mr. President. So we benchmarked it there because we figured that since Ghana is a poor nation and their intervention program is quite successful, meaning on a per peso value, it's quite efficient. No? So that's why we pattern it there for budgetary purposes.
But if I
Mr.
may,
President.
Mr. Sponsor, how can we be efficient when it's, well, it's more efficient than us because apparently they're one notch higher than us. But why can't we take the
Definitely,
top
Mr. Pre-
20?
Well,
What
Mr.
is
President,
it?
definitely they're not at the very last. No? They're not at the very last
I
of
guess,
the
Mr.
ranking.
President and dear sponsor, if I may interject, I think the proper question now is, did that intervention that cost 550 per person, is that happening after the assessment? Because if it's before, it's not successful kasi
That's correct.
mababa pa sila. But
That's
I
a
mean,
correct observation.
I'm sure the
Yeah.
answer is yes. That is
Yes,
the
Mr. President.
intervention that they made after, because the
Yeah,
sponsor is
yeah.
saying it is a success so far.
Yeah, Mr. President, the intervention happened after. This is the post-pandemic intervention, no? And several countries implemented several catch-up plans, no? The U.S., U.K., but it's very difficult to pattern after the U.S. or the U.K. because they have
The
close
budget.
to
Yes.
their resources are quite unlimited when it comes to education. So we had to pattern it to similar developing nations, no? To Vietnam, to Thailand, and we saw among all of those programs, World Bank reported that Ghana was is one of the most cost effective when it comes to the intervention program.
But I don't really hear much about Ghana's educational system or improved educational system.
Yeah. Well,
But
Mr.
is that an example given by the
The World Bank, Mr. President.
World Bank?
Yes.
And in any case, if I may, Mr. President, the response of the sponsor was to my question on how much this intervention will cost. So that was really just an example of an effective intervention that was very cost effective. It doesn't mean, if I'm correct, that that's exactly what will be copied. No, it
No,
will be
Mr.
tailored
President.
to whatever the need is. That's just the example of a cost effective intervention, correct?
Yes, correct, Mr. President. And just to give context, the MOE per student right now is about 250 pesos per student, Mr. President. So in other words, we're actually giving the school 250 pesos per student for their operating cost. No? So this is twice bigger than the MOE, Mr. President. So just to give context, no, on where the 550 pesos can be compared to.
Okay.
Mr. President, while I have two very important gentlemen in the discussion of education, in this discussion today, the sponsor, of course, and the Senate President, the other would be our Chairman of the Committee on Finance. May I just quickly, it will be part of my report on my trip, but quickly interject on that issue on cost-effective interventions. One of the cheapest cost-effective intervention to my mind, and I'm reminded every time I go back to Portugal, because the friends I have, the Portuguese friends I have, always remind me, that they compare themselves, the Portuguese compare themselves to Spanish in this way. Whenever there are tourists who come to Portugal, they marvel, and I am one of them who marvels at the fact that the Portuguese speak such good English. And then they can also understand and reply in Spanish, and to a certain extent, they understand French. So why do they understand all these languages so easily and speak English so well? This is the answer, low-lying fruit. All the American movies and TV shows that are shown as American or English, in the English language. Then they just put subtitles in Portuguese. Dito, I was shocked, Mr. President, because I'm sure when we were growing up, lahat ng American na pinapalabas is English. Ngayon, nakadub na in Filipino, and I go back to my quandary, hindi na ba nakakaintindi ng English ang mga Pilipino? Bakit nung panahon ng bata ako, nanonood ako ng English cartoons. So lahat din ng Pilipino nanonood ng English cartoons in English. Ngayon, dinadub na yon. Whether it's cartoons, an action movie, dinadub. Ba't kailangan idub? Diba? Can we go back? Can we insist? This is a low-lying fruit. Walang gastos yun. In fact, makakatipid pa yung mga networks if they don't bother to dub it. Can they just retain it in the language that it is brought to us? Now, iba naman if it's Korean because we really don't understand Korean. But take note, marami na nag-aaral ng Korean. So, why dub English movies and TV shows into Filipino when we're trying to promote the use of English? Diba? Simple lang yun. Again, I go back to the comparison being made by the Portuguese with the Spanish. Ang Spanish pala, pag nanonood sila ng TV show na American, they dub it in Spanish. So tuloy, yung mga Spanish, they do not understand, they cannot speak English as well daw as the Portuguese. Well, this is according to the Portuguese.
May I add
Yes, please,
to
Mr.
that
President.
train of thought of our distinguished colleague. If you remember Voltes 5, because JB Ejercito's a big fan
Yes,
of
I
Voltes 5.
remember.
So that was dubbed in English.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
If
Little
that were shown,
John, di ba, yung mga ganon. That was all Voltes 5 in English.
Mr. President, precisely, my point. Ngayon, yung mga ganyan na I don't know if there's anything as memorable as Voltes 5 was during our generation to these younger people, it's no longer in English. Sayang naman, it's a low-lying fruit. So if the gentleman here, and hopefully maybe there are other colleagues of ours listening from their own monitors and in the lounge, can join me. I want to file a resolution to address this because it's a choice that we need to make. It's a low-lying fruit. It's cheap. So to respond, how will they learn English kung hindi naman nag-i-English yung parents nila at hindi naman there are some teachers who aren't that comfortable in English? Di may napapanood sila. Di ba? So ganun lang yun, Mr. President. I'm happy to see the Senate President nodding, the gentleman, our sponsor, nodding as well. And I'll proceed to the next point, but I'm happy to be able to raise this point at this moment that we're
Just
discussing
to
this.
respond, Mr. President, yes, I believe we're part of the same generation. So I remember.
You are
I remember,
younger than us, but
I remember those times that all the cartoons and even the sitcoms were all in English.
yes.
And
Yes.
I have no idea how come it became Tagalog, but I would venture into maybe it's for the ratings. I think these
Pero
TV
diba-
stations are.
No, you're right, Mr. President, but I've thought long and hard about this. In as much as Filipinos who speak another language, yung dialect nila, whether it's Bisaya, Ilonggo, Ilocano, whatever, it's being translated, dubbed into Filipino. So that's also not their native. So why not dub it into English, which is an international language that we are saying that we all agree that we have to learn more of. Yun lang naman ang sa akin.
We're actually, dear colleagues, are losing the advantage.
Losing,
We're losing
exactly.
the advantage.
Totally
In
agree.
ASEAN countries, they're catching up with the English language. They're actually getting teachers here,
Yes,
the
Mr.
Philippines, to teach
President.
English there. And unfortunately, we don't have enough teachers anymore to teach our own children here
Exactly.
in the Philippines. So we're going to lose that advantage very soon.
We are, and I agree, Mr. President, we have exactly the same observation. So anyway, I've made my point and I'm happy that the gentlemen agree with me. So we can move on as His Honor already addressed this on the cost. The next item is on section 6. I'm good with that, no? I'll move to section 7. Yeah, so, Mr. President, on section 7, I had mentioned this question. Can teachers or para-teachers choose not to be a tutor because the bill states that they are responsible for tutoring learners? I know in private schools, there are tutors, not necessarily the same teacher teaching that subject. There are other tutors available to the students. How will this work, Your Honor?
Yeah. Mr. President, what we envision here is because teachers and para-teachers are already existing within the DepEd system, that they will be tapped to be tutors. And since they are also present in all of our schools, it's easy to mobilize teachers and para-teachers, Mr. President. But in addition to that, Mr. President, we know that it might not be enough we might not have enough teachers and para-teachers. We also included other potential tutors, no? For example, tertiary education students, students who are taking education as a course, even volunteers, Mr. President, we included that in the bill. So there are other potential tutors that we can tap into, and this is explained during the period of interpellation. This is actually an important feature for DepEd to use so they can expand their core of tutors, Mr. President. But the logic for the teachers and para-teachers is because of practicality. They're already there in the schools, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I get clarity on what, because I checked the definition of terms. We don't have a definition of terms, so I will assume that para-teacher
Yeah.
was defined in some other law
Yeah,
that we are just making reference to.
Mr. President, it's para-teachers. It's here, Mr. President.
Is it? Sorry, not.
Anong, I read that somewhere. Line 30. Here, Mr. President, page 3, line 30. Para-teachers are those who have taken the
There,
licensure
okay.
examination for teachers but were unable to qualify.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so as His Honor, as we were discussing, these teachers and para-teachers would be responsible for tutoring learners. I recall now that I did want to include an amendment here, Your Honor. Let me use my personal experience. My mother owned a Montessori school, and since I was an avid student and I just hung out with her during the summers and whenever I didn't have class, I would actually work with it was a preschool, so I would work with the preschool students on the reading, on basic math. And so I believe, Your Honor, that there would be possibilities for senior high students to also be tutors, especially if they intend to go into the teaching track. Of course, there's a certain standard that we need to maintain, but that would be a proposal that I would like to make, and that would be subject to the guidelines of DepEd on who would be qualified. But really, Your Honor, if you think of a home setting, the ates teach their younger siblings. So there's nothing that would prevent us from including that, and that will go into, I think it's one of the latter sections on the NSTP, wherein there is already a statement here that those who would render services as a student teacher would get credit for NSTP. I wanted something similar like that to be applied to senior students in the education track. That whatever credit that they can get, it could be any credit available to them as senior high students or future NSTP credits. And most likely, if they're in a teaching track, they love to do it. I mean, I did it on my own because I enjoyed it without anything in return. But if we can include that, Mr. President, that would be great.
Yeah, Mr. President, I agree with the lady from Taguig, especially senior high school. Some of them are already 18, 17, 18 years old.
Yes.
And those who are taking the
Education academic track.
a lot of them are going, most of them will probably end up in college, no? So,
And in fact, Mr. President, if I may just add, even for those who are taking, who intend to take, let's say, engineering or science, they'd probably even be better
Yeah.
than those who are, they would be probably be better than English teachers, practicing English teachers, because their proficiency is already in STEM. So if we, subject to style, Mr.
Yeah, I
President.
agree,
can
Mr.
you-
President, and that
Can
will-
you make that insertion?
yeah, I
on
agree. It
who-
will increase the number of potential tutors.
Yes.
And I believe also that the senior high school students are already at that age that they can already tutor younger children, no? To
Yes.
read, basic reading and basic mathematics.
Yes, and like I
those are
said,
the things
even
that they can help
science, no? I
with.
mean, maybe if I may, can we not define what they can teach, but just identify that seniors, high school students, may be accredited as well, something
Yeah.
to that effect, Mr. President. And may I also add, I've brought this up in a number of hearings, not particularly in the ARAL hearing, but in a number of hearings in the past over the years, that
We can define it.
we know, I know, I'm sure His Honor knows, many accomplished, I would say women because they tend to be women, but I don't want to limit ourselves to women, but many accomplished individuals who either retired early or chose to leave their profession early, either to take care of kids or to run a home business, that years later they think of giving back. They would be very much qualified, di ba? So
Oh,
baka
yes,
naman
Mr. President.
there can just be an accreditation system, Mr. President, kasi ang daming ganon. And I'll give you another example, whether they want to teach or not, that I don't know. We have so many retired government officials who may want to give back as well. So if we may add to this list, no? Teachers, para-teachers, senior high students, and what do we call them? Other, I don't know if you want to say other individuals who other qualified individuals who would be accredited by DepEd, something
Yes,
like that.
Mr.
Your Honor,
President,
subject to
I
style.
agree. In fact, the gentle lady from Taguig made a good point on the senior high school students. We have about 4 million senior high school students. So that's a lot
Yeah.
of warm bodies that we can tap. So I agree, Mr. President, and we can put
And
that
they're
in.
already there in the
Correct.
system. Hindi ka na kailangan mag-import ng teachers from other areas. They're already there.
Dyan natin linagay. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President. So, we can, Mr. President, we can put that into a motion and then subject to style.
Sige.
Yeah.
So, Mr. President, I move to, are we, Section 7, no? Under Section 7, I move to include senior high school students and other qualified individuals subject to the requirements of DepEd, subject to style, that
Yes.
it be included in
I
Section
accept, Mr. President, subject to style.
Is there an objection? There being none, amendment is approved.
Qualified volunteers.
Okay. Similarly, since we're on the same topic, Your Honor, let me jump to Section 7. Sorry, from Section 7, I will jump to Section 14. As I had mentioned, I would like I would like to also recognize senior high schools who serve as tutors to be given commensurate recognition, including but not limited to NSTP credits. Subject to style, Mr. President. That is the motion, that this be included.
I accept, Mr. President, and that's a good idea, Mr. President.
Thank
That's
you.
a form of incentive.
Yes.
So we can attract senior high school students to participate in this program. And like I mentioned before, we have 4 million students already in our schools. And that's a idea that we can pursue, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, amendment is approved.
Mr. President, on Section 12, I support the reference to RA 8370 or the Children's Television Act of 1997. But we note that this only refers to the airtime, allotment of airtime. So the question remains, who will be producing this? It may or may not have to be covered by this bill, but I just wanted to point it out. If His Honor intends to deal with that separately or to generate interest in the private sector.
Yes, Mr. President, we made that referral here in the bill, Mr. President. So just in case the DepEd will pursue coming up with TV programs in line with the ARAL program, they can actually tap the existing law already, Mr. President. So
Okay, maybe later on we can consider if there are even incentives that we can give, but we don't
Yeah,
have to
Mr.
cover it
President.
here, because I'm happy that this airtime is mandated and it's just reiterated in this bill, but really the content has to be something people
yeah, Mr. President.
get,
we're-
I mean, obviously, to this day, whatever we have produced is not enough, or at least not getting the airtime. So I don't know if just the airtime itself will suffice. So maybe we're not producing. I look at my little nephews, and you know, Mr. President, aside from U.S. and British generated programs for kids, no, like preschoolers. Some are in our neighboring ASEAN countries like Singapore, I think, and baka Malaysian. Kasi medyo yung accent, I can tell na Singaporean or Malaysian. So if they can do it, why can't we do it, di ba? So yun lang, maybe subject of another bill or a resolution for
Yeah,
us to
Mr.
support.
President. We can actually, I plan to actually have an oversight hearing on RA 8370 or Children Television Network. Mr. President, this law is quite antiquated already. Children watch YouTube,
Exactly.
they go to the internet. In fact, very rare children will watch television. No? So we need to update this law and make it more responsive to technologies right now, Mr. President.
Agree,
Same
agree,
with the
Mr.
National
President.
Book Law. No?
Yes.
Children now, they share digital books with one another using
That's true.
applications, Mr. President.
Although on that note, I still feel it's a good habit to get into, to hold a book.
Yes, Mr. President.
Believe me, I read digital books. I'm mostly digital now, including audiobooks. But I think it's still a good habit. So in that sense, moving forward, I'm happy to join His Honor in studying. But I'd still like to ensure that we still have budget for the paper, what do you call it?
The traditional books.
Traditional
Yeah.
books, because the biggest budget we put for that is really in the nooks that they're putting up all over the country, which presents the child with their first exposure to fun and interesting books to read. But on that note, yes, we must study how we can make it more up to date with the times.
Yes.
That's it, Mr. President. I have no other amendments.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
President. I thank the good gentle lady from Taguig for her excellent suggestions, and definitely it improved the bill and sharpened the bill much more. Thank you, Mr.
My
President.
pleasure always, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Santa Pia. Majority
Thank you,
Leader.
Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Pia Cayetano. Thank you to our distinguished sponsor of the measure.